The glass orchard did not simply house diplomacy, it metabolized it. The station was a marvel of bioacoustic engineering, a sprawling lattice of transparent polymers and living crystal, floating in the silent vacuum of the Kessel sector. Here, the walls did not have ears. The walls were ears. Every corridor was lined with crystalline fronds that vibrated in response to the specific frequencies of truth and deception. It was said that a lie spoken in the grand atrium would cause the leaves to turn a sickly, bruised violet, while the resonant frequency of an honest accord would make them chime like distant wind chimes. Edwin Hart adjusted his collar for the 10th time in 2 minutes. He hated formal wear, and he hated it even more when the fabric felt like it cost more than his parents' entire mortgage back on Earth. Beside him, walking with a stride that was fluid and predatory, was Annie Vile. To the casual observer, Annie was the epitome of Vulpine elegance. She was tall, her posture rigid with the discipline of the high diplomatic corps. Her fur was a sleek, silver-tipped charcoal that seemed to absorb the ambient light of the station, and her triangular ears swiveled with microscopic precision tracking conversations 3 clusters away. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue that left her arms free, a necessity for a species that communicated as much with gesture as with vocal cords. "Stop fidgeting," Annie said. She did not look at him. Her voice was cool, smooth, and perfectly modulated for the public sphere. It was the voice of a statue. "You look like you are trying to escape your own skin." "I am considering it," Edwin replied, keeping his voice low. He was mindful of the crystalline ferns arching over their heads. They shimmered with a soft, pale green light neutral. "This collar is trying to strangle me. I think it is an assassin sent by your political rivals." "It is silk from the thresher weavers," Annie corrected her gaze, fixed on the double doors ahead. "It is not strangling you. It is merely reminding you of your posture. Stand up straight, Edwin. You represent humanity tonight. Try not to look like you are apologizing for your existence." Edwin straightened his spine. "I thought I was just the trophy husband tonight. The harmless human accessory." Annie stopped. The sudden cessation of movement was more arresting than a shout. She turned her head slightly, her amber eyes locking onto his. For a second, the vertical pupils widened, then contracted. It was a look he knew well. It was the look she gave him when he was being difficult, or when she was terrified and trying to hide it. Tonight, he could not tell the difference. "There is no such thing as harmless in the glass orchard," she said softly. "Remember the briefing. Smile, nod. Do not engage in debates about warp mechanics. And for the love of the stars, do not let anyone bait you into speaking about the Vox Accord." "I know the drill, Annie," Edwin said, his tone softening. He wanted to reach out and touch her arm to bridge the icy gap she had constructed between them since they boarded the shuttle, but he knew better. Public displays of affection were frowned upon in Vulpine protocol, especially during high-stakes negotiations. "I am just here to hold your drink and look adequately domesticated." Annie let out a breath that might have been a sigh or a hiss of frustration. "Just stay close, but not too close." They entered the grand atrium. The room was a sensory overload. The ceiling was a domed transparency, revealing the swirl of the nebula outside, but the true spectacle was below. Hundreds of delegates from a dozen species mingled among the singing trees. The air hummed with the sound of polite conversation, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated in Edwin's chest. As a truth phonetics expert, Edwin experienced sound differently than most. He did not just hear it. He felt the texture of it. He could taste the metallic tang of a forced compliment and feel the sandpaper grit of a veiled threat. Tonight, the room felt like broken glass wrapped in velvet. Edwin navigated the crowd, playing his part to perfection. He smiled at the crustacean ambassador from the Hydra system. He nodded politely when a towering four-armed general made a joke about human bone density. He kept his hands clasped behind his back and his opinions locked behind his teeth. Annie was working the room like a master fencer. She moved from group to group, her words sharp and precise. Edwin watched her from a polite distance of 3 feet. She was brilliant. She was terrifying. She was the reason the Vox Accord had made it this far. The Accord was a delicate acoustic treaty, a vow that would stabilize the slipspace corridor using the resonant frequencies of the signing leaders' voices. If it worked, it would end a 60-year Cold War. If it failed, the corridor would collapse, taking the station and everyone on it into oblivion. And someone here wanted it to fail. Edwin sipped a drink that tasted like carbonated rainwater and watched his wife. She was currently speaking with Chancellor Sable Kor. Kor was a Vulpine of imposing stature, his fur a deep, rusty red that clashed with the pristine surroundings. He was the head of the opposition, a political faction that believed the Accord was a surrender of Vulpine sovereignty. He smiled as he spoke to Annie, but Edwin could see the tension in the Chancellor's jaw. Edwin stepped closer, tuning his ears. The crystal leaves above Kor and Annie were vibrating with a low, dissonant hum, the frequency of conflict. A heavy burden for such narrow shoulders, Kor was saying, his voice an oily baritone. The Accord requires a purity of intent, High Diplomat Vial. Are you certain your attachments have not compromised your resonance? Kor's eyes flicked to Edwin. It was a dismissal, clear and brutal. Annie did not flinch. My resonance is calibrated to the truth, Chancellor. Can you say the same? I hear your own delegation is having trouble harmonizing the final stanza of the oath. Kor chuckled, a sound like dry leaves crinkling. We merely want to ensure the corridor remains secure. Humans are such volatile creatures, unpredictable variables in an equation that demands precision. Edwin is not a variable, Annie said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. He is my spouse, and he is none of your concern. Of course, Kor dipped his head mockingly. Enjoy the evening, High Diplomat, while the music lasts. He walked away, his tail swaying with arrogant rhythm. Annie stood still for a moment, her back to Edwin. The crowd flowed around them, a river of silk and uniforms. Edwin stepped up behind her, close enough to smell the faint scent of ozone and pine that always clung to her fur. He is trying to rattle you, Edwin murmured. I know, Annie said. She did not turn around. Her shoulders were tight, drawn up toward her ears. You handled him well. Did I? Annie, talk to me. What is going on? You have been acting like a stranger for 3 days. Not here, Edwin. Then where? We go back to the quarters and you lock yourself in the study. We come out here and you treat me like a prop. I can help you. I can hear things you miss. You cannot help with this, she snapped, her voice cracking the diplomatic veneer for just a microsecond. Try me. Annie turned her head slightly, just enough so he could see her profile. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. Go to the balcony, she ordered. Get some air. I need to greet the delegation from Sol. Annie. Go. It was a command, not a request. Edwin felt a flash of irritation, hot and sharp. He bit his tongue, nodded stiffly, and turned toward the translucent doors leading to the observation deck. The balcony was a relief. The air here was thinner, recycled directly from the hydroponic filters, crisp and cold. The noise of the party was muffled by the thick acoustic glass. Edwin walked to the railing and looked out at the nebula. It was a bruise of purple and gold against the black, beautiful and indifferent. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. He hated being shut out. He hated that she thought she had to protect him from the ugly side of her world. He was a phoneticist, for crying out loud. He dealt with the ugly truth of voices every day. He knew when a politician was lying about a famine. He knew when a criminal was lying about a murder. He knew the sound of deceit better than he knew the sound of his own breathing. The glass doors slid open behind him. Edwin turned, expecting a waiter or a lost guest. It was Annie. She had followed him. She did not come to the railing. She stood near the door, half in shadow. The light from the party spilled out, illuminating the silver tips of her ears. She looked exhausted. The confident mask had slipped, revealing a terrified creature underneath. "Annie," he asked, his anger evaporating. She held up a hand, stopping him. She looked left, then right, scanning the shadows of the balcony. The crystal plants here were large fern-like structures that grew from the floor, their leaves wide and sensitive. They were silent now, dormant in the quiet. Annie turned her back to him again. She leaned against the glass wall, looking back into the party, as if checking if they were watched. Then she spoke. It was barely a whisper. It was spoken in Vulpine, her native tongue, a language of clicks, growls, and whistling vowels that few humans could pronounce, let alone understand. Vakra. Edwin froze. Stupid. It was the word she used when he left his socks on the floor. It was the word she used when he tried to fix the toaster and shorted out the entire apartment block. It was an endearment, usually, a playful nip. But this time, the tone was wrong. Edwin's mind trained to dissect phonemes, and Formants broke the sound down in a millisecond. The word was Vakra. But the breath support was shallow, originating from the upper diaphragm, not the throat. The pitch started high and slid down a microtone shift that in high Vulpine indicated urgency, not judgment. And the glottal stop at the end, it wasn't a hard click. It was soft, trembling. She wasn't calling him stupid. She was terrified. She was checking the line. In Vulpine tactical communication, calling a squad mate fool or blind with that specific intonation was a code. It meant verify connection. Are you receiving? It was a test. She wanted to know if he was listening. Not just hearing, but listening. Without thinking, driven by instinct, by the adrenaline spiking in his blood, by the sheer need to bridge the gap she had put between them, Edwin answered. He didn't speak English. He didn't ask, what? He opened his mouth and shaped the sounds he had practiced in secret for 5 years, listening to her talk in her sleep, listening to her recordings, analyzing the geometry of her throat. Ka shil, he whispered back. I am here. The word left his lips a complex trill, followed by a guttural snap. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The silent crystal ferns on the balcony didn't just vibrate. They screamed. A high-pitched, resonant wail erupted from the plants, a sonic feedback loop that hit Edwin like a physical blow. The glass walls of the balcony shook. Inside the ballroom, heads turned in unison. The sound wasn't just noise. It was an alarm. Unregistered dialect detected. Harmonic anomaly. Threat level red. No! Edwin gasped, covering his ears. Annie spun around. For the first time all night, her face was completely naked of diplomatic poise. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open in shock. She stared at him, not with anger, but with absolute disbelief. You spoke, she whispered, her voice trembling. Do you speak it? Before he could answer, the doors slammed open. Security! A voice bellowed. 4 Vulpine guards in heavy ceremonial armor stormed onto the balcony, their stun batons crackling with blue energy. Behind them, the party was in chaos. The crystals inside were flashing jagged red pulses. Secure the anomaly! The lead guard shouted, pointing a baton at Edwin. Edwin raised his hands. Wait, it was an accident, Silence, the guard roared. Your vocal resonance has triggered a Category 4 violation. You are under arrest for acoustic sabotage. They grabbed him. Rough hands hauled him away from the railing. Edwin stumbled, looking desperately at Annie. Annie, he called out. Tell them it was just a mistake. Annie stood frozen. The guards were dragging him past her. She looked at him, and then, as if a shutter had been slammed down, the mask returned. Her posture straightened. Her ears flattened against her skull. Her eyes went cold and dead. She looked at the lead guard and spoke in perfect, icy galactic standard. Remove him. He has clearly had too much to drink. I will not have my husband embarrass the delegation further. Edwin felt like he had been punched in the gut. She was discarding him. Just like that. The guards dragged him through the ballroom. The guests parted like the Red Sea, whispering and staring. Edwin saw their faces a blur of judgment and amusement. The human who couldn't handle his liquor. The trophy husband who broke the furniture. But as they hauled him past the entrance to the kitchens, Edwin looked back one last time. Annie was still standing on the balcony threshold watching him go, and he saw it. Her hand, the one hanging by her side, hidden in the folds of her midnight dress, was shaking. It was a violent, uncontrollable tremor. Her claws were digging into her own palm so hard that if she weren't careful, she would draw blood. She wasn't angry. She was horrified. And she was calculating. He was shoved into a turbo lift. The doors hissed shut, cutting off the sight of her. Edwin leaned his head against the cold metal wall of the lift. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He replayed the moment in his head. The whisper, Vakra, the breath, the tremor. And then his own response, Kashil. Why had the plants reacted so violently? He had studied the glass orchard schematics. It was designed to detect aggressive tonality lies and weapons fire. It shouldn't have triggered a lockdown over a simple Vulpine phrase, even one spoken with a human accent. Unless the phrase itself wasn't the trigger. Unless the fact that a human spoke it was the anomaly. Or unless the system was already primed to scream. The lift stopped. The doors opened onto the detention block. Move, the guard grunted, shoving him forward. They marched him down a corridor that hummed with a low, oppressive bass note. This was the holding area for diplomatic incidents, drunk senators' spies caught red-handed, and now Edwin Hart. They threw him into an interrogation room and sealed the door. The room was small, white and soundproof to the point of insanity. The silence was heavy, pressing against his eardrums. The walls were made of a porous gray material. Edwin recognized it immediately. Mnemonic foam. It absorbed sound and replayed it back to interrogators later. It could detect the micro-tremors in a larynx that indicated deception. Edwin sat on the single metal chair. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his pulse. Think, Edwin, he muttered to himself. Analyze the data. Annie said stupid, but she meant check. He replied, I am here. The station screamed. Annie threw him to the wolves, but her hand was shaking. If she wanted him gone, she could have divorced him. If she wanted him silenced, she could have left him on Earth. Why bring him here to the most sensitive acoustic environment in the galaxy only to provoke him? The door slid open. Edwin straightened up, expecting an interrogator. It was Chancellor Sable Kor. The Vulpine politician walked in alone. He was not wearing armor or carrying a weapon. He held a glass of amber liquid in one hand and looked for all the world like he had just taken a wrong turn on the way to the buffet. Mr. Hart, Kor said, his voice smooth as silk over a razor blade. I must admit you are full of surprises. Chancellor, Edwin said, keeping his voice flat. I apologize for the disruption. I am afraid the atmosphere here does not agree with me. Kor smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. He circled the table, his tail swishing lazily. Oh, do not play the fool, Mr. Hart. We are past that. The biometric sensors on the balcony recorded everything. You spoke Vulpine. High Vulpine to be exact. The dialect of the northern clans. Kor leaned in, placing his hands on the table. Where did a human learn the tongue of the Fox Kings? Your wife certainly did not teach you. It is forbidden to teach outsiders without council approval. I have a good ear, Edwin said, and I watch a lot of foreign cinema. Cinema, Kor repeated, amused. You have a remarkable accent for someone who learned from movies. You sounded almost native, and that is the problem. Kor tapped a claw on the metal table. Click, click, click. The glass orchard is sensitive, Edwin. It is tuned to the specific resonance of the species involved in the Vox Accord. When you spoke, the system did not know how to categorize you. A human throat, making Vulpine sounds. It registered as a counterfeit signal. A forgery. Edwin's mind raced. A forgery. I am just a mimic chancellor. It is a party trick. Nothing more. Perhaps, Kor said, straightening up. He took a sip of his drink. But you see, we are very concerned with mimics right now. The Vox Accord relies on the absolute authenticity of the voice. If a voice can be faked, if a human can sound like a Vulpine, then the security of the corridor is a myth. Kor looked at Edwin with eyes that were cold and calculating. You are an anomaly, Mr. Hart, and anomalies are dangerous variables. I wonder what else you have heard. What else has your wife whispered to you in the dark? Nothing, Edwin said firmly. She thinks I am an idiot. You heard her. Yes, Kor mused. She called you stupid. A common sentiment, I assume. But she seemed quite distressed when she said it. Kor turned to the door. You will remain here until the Security Council decides what to do with you. Do not get comfortable. I suspect your stay will be brief, and your departure abrupt. Kor left. The door hissed shut. Edwin slumped in the chair. He was in deep trouble. Kor wasn't just fishing, he was hunting. He suspected Edwin knew something, or at least that Edwin was capable of knowing something. The silence of the room pressed in again. Suddenly, the lock on the door chirped. It didn't slide open, it just unlocked. A figure slipped inside, moving so fast Edwin barely registered it. It was a human woman, short, stocky, wearing a technician's jumpsuit, smeared with grease. She had a tablet tucked under one arm and a scowl that could peel paint. Dr. Imani Park, the station's chief resonance engineer. She didn't look at him. She marched to the wall panel and started jamming commands into it. You are an idiot, she said. Her voice was raspy, like she smoked cheap cigars. A colossal intergalactic idiot. Nice to meet you too, Doctor, Edwin said, blinking. Are you here to interrogate me? I am here to stop the security feed from broadcasting your heartbeat to the entire station, she snapped. Hold still. She walked over to him and slapped a small circular device onto his neck. It buzzed, then went cold. Biodamper, she explained. It fuzzes your vitals. Makes you look like you are sleeping on the monitors. Why are you helping me? Imani looked at him then. Her eyes were dark and tired, rimmed with red. Because Annie asked me to. 5 minutes ago. She said her husband had a big mouth and a death wish. Annie sent you, hope flared in Edwin's chest. She couldn't come herself. Kor's got eyes on her every move. She is playing the Ice Queen up there, trying to convince the council not to toss you out an airlock. Imani pulled a small data chip from her pocket and shoved it into Edwin's hand. It was warm. Take this. Hide it. Do not let them find it. What is it? Edwin whispered, looking at the tiny silver shard. Diagnostic data, Imani said, lowering her voice. From the Orchard's core. I pulled it this morning. She leaned in close, her face grim. The resonance of the station is drifting. Someone is messing with the tuning forks. They are slowly shifting the frequency of the Vox Accord. Edwin's blood ran cold. Shifting it to what? To a trap, Imani hissed. If the accord is signed with the frequency off balance, the slipspace corridor won't stabilize. It will invert. It will collapse right on top of us. The moment Annie speaks her vow, this whole station turns into a black hole. Kor, Edwin breathed. Kor or whoever is pulling his strings, Imani said, straightening up. The plants screaming on the balcony. That wasn't just because you spoke Vulpine. It was because the system is already on edge. It is hypersensitive because it is fighting a jam signal. She moved back to the door. The system marked you as an anomaly because you spoke the truth in a language you shouldn't know, in a place that is being rewired to accept a lie. What do I do? Edwin asked, gripping the chip. Stay alive, Imani said. And keep your mouth shut unless you want to blow the whole operation. Annie called you stupid to get a reaction, Edwin. She needed to create a scene to get you out of the line of fire. Core was going to scan you at the party. He had a portable reader. If he had scanned you there, he would have seen you are a phoneticist. He would have known you could hear the drift. Edwin stared at her. The realization hit him like a physical weight. Annie hadn't insulted him. She hadn't discarded him. She had provoked him. She knew he would react to the tone. She knew he would speak Vulpine. She knew it would trigger the alarm. She had caused a scene to get him arrested, because being in a cell was the only place Core couldn't get to him quietly. She had turned him into a public spectacle to save him from a private execution. "She saved me," Edwin whispered. "By breaking your heart, yeah," Imani grunted. "She is pragmatic. I like her. Now hide that chip. I have to go before they realize the feed is looped." Imani slipped out the door, leaving Edwin alone in the silence. He looked down at his hand. The data chip was small, sharp-edged. He clenched his fist around it. He closed his eyes and replayed the sound of Annie's voice on the balcony. Vakra. The tremor. The breath. The checking tone. She wasn't pushing him away. She was giving him a role. She needed him to be the outcast. She needed him to be the anomaly. Because in a system designed to listen to everything, the only person who could move unnoticed was the one everyone had already stopped listening to. Edwin opened his eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He was a truth phonetician. He spent his life analyzing the architecture of lies. And he had just been handed the blueprints to the biggest lie in the galaxy. "Okay, Annie," he whispered to the empty room. "I am listening." He leaned back, waiting for the next move. The game had started, and for the first time in his life, Edwin Hart knew exactly what his voice was worth. It was a weapon, and he was going to sharpen it. The interrogation room did not look like a prison. It looked like the inside of a very expensive, very sterile musical instrument. Edwin Hart sat in the center of the chamber, his hands resting on a table made of brushed aluminum that felt cold enough to burn his skin. The chair was bolted to the floor, but it was the walls that drew his attention. They were not made of concrete or steel. They were lined with a material that looked like spun sugar compressed into dense gray sheets. It was a resonance membrane, a piece of bioacoustic engineering that cost more than the GDP of a small Earth nation. In the silence, Edwin could hear the blood rushing in his own ears. The room was designed to amplify the microscopic vibrations of the human body, the tremor of a vocal cord, the hitch of a breath, the erratic rhythm of a heart trying to hide a lie. If he lied in here, the walls would catch the dissonance between his voice and his biology. They would feed it back to him as a sonic pulse, a headache that started behind the eyes and felt like a drill boring into the skull. It was a truth machine that operated on the principle of pain. The door slid open with a hiss that sounded like a snake striking. Chancellor Sable Core entered. The Vulpine politician moved with a grace that was almost offensive. He wore a tunic of dark crimson silk, embroidered with the silver thread of the High Council. His tail, thick and luxurious, swayed behind him with a hypnotic pendulum rhythm. He did not look like an interrogator. He looked like a dinner guest who had wandered into the wrong room and decided to critique the furniture. "Comfortable, Mr. Hart?" Core asked. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth as aged whiskey, but underneath it, Edwin heard the faint metallic scrape of calculation. "The chair is a little stiff," Edwin replied, keeping his voice perfectly level. "But the acoustics are fantastic. I could record a symphony in here." Core smiled. It was not a nice smile. It showed too many teeth. He walked around the table, his claws clicking softly on the floor tiles. "This room is a marvel," Core agreed. "It listens to the intent behind the sound. It separates the signal from the noise. You see, Edwin, most species believe that words define the truth. But we Vulpine know better. The truth is in the frequency." Core stopped directly behind Edwin. He leaned down his muzzle close to Edwin's ear. Edwin could smell him a mix of expensive sandalwood cologne and the musk of a predator. Tell me, Core whispered. Where did a human learn the northern dialect of the high Vulpine tongue? And more importantly, who taught you the phonemes of a distress call? Edwin felt the muscles in his neck tighten. He had to be careful. If he lied, the room would punish him. If he told the truth, he might damn Annie. I have an ear for languages, Edwin said. He focused on the technical truth. I am a phonetician. I study sound. I picked it up listening to the broadcasts. A low vibration started in the walls. A dull pressure began to build behind Edwin's temples. It was a warning. The room knew he was omitting something. Core chuckled, walking back around to face him. The room disagrees, Mr. Hart. It thinks you are being selective. Let us try again. You spoke to High Diplomat Vale on the balcony. She used a specific cadence. You responded. That was not a broadcast you were mimicking. That was a conversation. Core placed his hands on the table and leaned in. His vertical pupils narrowed. Is your wife a traitor, Edwin? Is she feeding you state secrets in bed? The question hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Edwin looked up at the Chancellor. He thought of Annie. He thought of the way she brushed her teeth with military precision. He thought of the way she slept, curled in a ball, her tail over her nose. He thought of the terrifying coldness in her eyes when she had ordered the guards to take him away. I learned it from failed marriages, Edwin said. The room was silent. No hum, no pain. Core blinked, taken aback. I beg your pardon. My first wife was French. Edwin continued, his voice dry and self-deprecating. She used to mutter insults under her breath when I forgot the anniversary. My second partner was a kestrel who screeched when she was angry. I learned to listen to the tone, Chancellor. When a partner thinks you are an idiot, the pitch is universal. I did not need a teacher to know Annie was calling me stupid. I just needed experience in being a disappointment. It was a deflection, a piece of dark humor wrapped around a kernel of emotional truth. And because the emotion was genuine, the sting of feeling inadequate, the fear that Annie really did see him as a burden, the room accepted it. The walls remained silent. Core stared at him for a long moment, searching for a crack. Finally, he straightened up, looking disappointed. You are a glib creature, Core said dismissively. But humor will not open the doors of this cell. You are a security risk, Mr. Hart. The Vox Accord relies on purity. You are a contaminant. I am a husband, Edwin corrected. And right now I am a husband who would like a lawyer. You are on Vulpine sovereign territory, Core said. Human laws do not apply here. We do not have lawyers. We have adjudicators. And I am afraid the adjudication for acoustic sabotage is usually silence. The threat was clear. Core turned to leave. However, the Chancellor added, pausing at the door, it seems you have friends in high places, or perhaps simply owners who want their property back. The door slid open again. Annie Vile walked in. If the room was cold, before the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment she crossed the threshold. She was still wearing the midnight blue gown from the gala, but the festive atmosphere was gone. She held a datapad in one hand, her posture rigid. She did not look at Edwin. She looked at Core. Chancellor, Annie said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. You are holding a member of my delegation without formal charges. The Sol Alliance has lodged a protest. If you do not release him to my custody, you will have a diplomatic incident on your hands before the appetizer course is finished. Core smiled, a slow, oily expression. Hi, Diplomat Vile. I was merely having a chat with your pet. He has a very interesting way of viewing your marriage. Annie's ears swiveled slightly, catching the nuance, but her face remained stone. My marriage is not a subject for council debate. Release him. He is a security risk, Core countered. He triggered a Category 4 alarm. He is a phonetician who had too much champagne and tried to impress his wife, Annie lied smoothly. It was a mistake. I will take responsibility for his containment. Core looked between them. He was enjoying this. He was watching the dynamic, testing the tension. "Very well," Kor said. "I release him to your custody, High Diplomat. But be warned. If he makes so much as a squeak during the accord ceremony tomorrow, I will have his vocal cords surgically removed. For the safety of the station, of course." Kor bowed mockingly to Edwin. "A pleasure, Mr. Hart. Do try to keep your accent under control." The Chancellor swept out of the room, the door hissing shut behind him. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. The silence in the interrogation room was heavy, suffocating. Edwin looked at Annie. She was staring at the blank wall, her jaw set so hard he could see the muscle twitching beneath her fur. "Annie," Edwin said softly. She turned on him, and for a second, he thought she was going to hit him. Her eyes were blazing with an intensity that terrified him. "You fool," she hissed. "You absolute reckless fool." "I was answering you," Edwin argued, standing up. "You checked the line. You used the distress pitch. What was I supposed to do, ignore you?" "Yes." Annie stepped closer, her voice dropping to a furious whisper. "Yes, you were supposed to ignore me. You were supposed to be the ignorant human husband who knows nothing about high Vulpine syntax. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have painted a target on your back the size of a supernova." "I thought you were in trouble," Edwin said stubbornly. "I heard fear in your voice, Annie. Real fear, not diplomatic stress. Terror." Annie stopped. The anger seemed to drain out of her, leaving her looking frail and exhausted. She looked away, her ears drooping slightly. "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I am terrified." "Then tell me why," Edwin pleaded. He reached out his hand, hovering near her arm, but not touching. "Why act like you hate me out there? Why throw me to the wolves?" Annie looked at him. Her eyes were sad, a deep amber sadness that broke his heart. "Because the wolves are hungry, Edwin," she said. "And if they think you matter to me, they will use you to tear my throat out. The only way to keep you safe is to make them believe you are nothing, a mistake, a regret." "Is that what I am?" Edwin asked, his voice rough. "A regret." Annie closed the distance between them. She reached up and placed a hand on his chest. Her claws retracted, her palm warm against his shirt. It was the first time she had touched him in 3 days. "You are the only thing in this universe that makes sense to me," she whispered. "I called you stupid to save your life." Kor was approaching with a resonance scanner. "If he had seen your vitals spike when I told you the truth, he would have known you were listening. I had to insult you. I had to make your reaction look like hurt feelings, not tactical awareness." "What is the truth, Annie?" Edwin asked, covering her hand with his. "What is going on?" "Not here." She pulled her hand away as if burned. She glanced at the walls. "The room is off, but the station has ears everywhere. Come with me. You are being transferred." "Transferred where? Back to the hotel?" "No." Annie set her mask, sliding back into place. "Medical. Dr. Park insists on examining you for acoustic trauma. It is the only excuse I could find to get you out of Kor's sight for an hour." She turned and marched toward the door. "Walk behind me. Look ashamed. And for the love of the void, Edwin, do not speak Vulpine." The medical bay of the glass orchard was usually a place of pristine white lights and soft beeping. But Dr. Imani Park's domain was the sub-level engineering and bioacoustic maintenance deck, which looked more like the inside of a combustion engine than a hospital. Cables thick as pythons snaked across the ceiling. Steam vented from pressure valves. The air smelled of ozone copper and burnt coffee. Annie led Edwin through a maze of machinery to a small shielded alcove where Dr. Park was waiting. The short human woman was pacing, chewing on a stylus. "You took your time," Imani grumbled as they approached. "I was about 2 minutes away from staging a reactor leak just to clear the hallway." "Kor was persistent," Annie said. She looked at Edwin, then at Imani. "He knows Imani, or he suspects. He called Edwin a contaminant. He is not wrong, Imani muttered. She grabbed Edwin's arm and dragged him toward a bank of monitors. Sit. Don't touch anything. Especially that red button. That flushes the sewage into the nebula, and I don't want to do the paperwork. Edwin sat. Nice to see you again, Doctor. Cut the pleasantries, Imani said. She tapped a sequence on the console. A holographic display flared to life in the air above them. It showed a rotating 3D model of the glass orchard. At the center of the station was a pulsing blue light. This, Imani pointed to the light, is the coral core. It is the heart of the station. It is ancient tech left over from the precursor architects. We built the station around it because the core has a unique property. It stabilizes slip space using bioacoustic resonance. The Vox Accord, Edwin said, nodding. The leaders speak their vows, the core amplifies the truth in their voices, and the energy locks the corridor open. Right, Imani said. It is a truth lock. It only works if the voice is authentic. Emotional weight, lung capacity, history. The core reads it all. You cannot trick it with a recording. But, Annie interrupted, her voice tight. You can trick it with a clone. Edwin looked at his wife. A clone? You mean a person? No, Imani said grimly. A sonic clone. A ghost. She typed another command. The blue light in the hologram turned an angry, jagged red. For the last week, I have been tracking energy spikes in the core's intake buffers. Someone is feeding it data. Massive amounts of it. But it is not random noise. It is voice data. High-fidelity recordings of a specific individual stripped down to the phoneme, analyzed and reconstructed. Imani looked at Annie. They are building a digital model of your voice, Annie. Edwin felt a chill go down his spine. Why? Because, Annie said, crossing her arms, the Vox Accord has a failsafe. If the High Diplomat revokes the vow, if I speak the words of dissolution into the core, the corridor doesn't just close. It destabilizes. It creates a resonant feedback loop that shatters anything within 10,000 kilometers. A bomb, Edwin realized. A sonic bomb made of space-time. Exactly, Imani said. Someone wants to sabotage the peace treaty. But they cannot just blow up the station. That would unite the factions against them. They need it to look like a betrayal. They want the Vulpine High Diplomat to stand up at the ceremony and declare war. But Annie wouldn't do that, Edwin said. She won't have to, Imani said. They are going to hijack the core. When Annie steps up to the podium, they will overlay her real voice with the ghost signal. The ghost will speak the words of dissolution. The core will read it as authentic because it is built from her own voice data. The corridor collapses. Millions die. And history records that Annie Vale destroyed the peace. Edwin stared at the red pulse on the screen. It was a perfect, diabolical plan. That is why they needed you isolated, Edwin said to Annie. And that is why Core was interested in me. If I am a truth phonetician, I might hear the overlay. I might hear the ghost. Exactly, Annie said. Core is likely working with the cabal behind this. He needs the Accord to fail so his faction can take power back on the homeworld. He cannot kill me before the ceremony, or the lock won't engage at all. He needs me alive, but he needs me compromised. So what do we do? Edwin asked. We cancel the ceremony. We can't, Annie said. If we delay, the current stability field collapses naturally in 48 hours. The corridor closes forever. The war restarts instantly. We have to sign the accord. But if you speak, the ghost triggers, Edwin argued. We have to kill the ghost, Imani said. She pulled a tool from her belt, a complex-looking hydrospanner. I can purge the data from the core, but I cannot do it from here. I need physical access to the memory banks, and those are locked behind a level 10 security clearance. I have level 10, Annie said. No, a voice spoke from the shadows. You have level 10 diplomatic. The banks are level 10 architectural. Your codes won't work. Edwin jumped. Annie spun around, a small energy pistol, appearing in her hand from nowhere. Rook stepped out from behind a stack of crates. The Vulpine security officer held his hands up, palms open. He was wearing his gray uniform, but he looked tired. His fur was unkempt, and his eyes were weary. "Easy, High Diplomat," Rook said softly. "I am not here to arrest you." "You signed the order to detain my husband," Annie said, keeping the gun leveled at his chest. "I signed an order that had a typo in the case file number," Rook said calmly. "It delayed the processing by 3 hours. Why do you think he was sitting in interrogation instead of being on a shuttle to a prison colony?" Annie hesitated. She glanced at Edwin. Edwin nodded slowly. "He did say something to me," Edwin said. "In the corridor. He told me not to trust my ears." Rook nodded. He lowered his hands slowly. "The station is compromised. My superiors are compromised. Kor has replaced half the security detail with his own private contractors. I cannot stop them, but I can tell you where the door is." Rook reached into his pocket and pulled out a physical key, an old-fashioned heavy iron key that looked completely out of place on a high-tech station. "The archivist," Rook said. "Nera. She keeps the old records, the ones the system tries to delete. She has a back door to the core." He tossed the key to Edwin. Edwin caught it. It was cold and heavy. "Why are you helping us?" Annie asked, lowering her gun but not holstering it. Rook looked at her, and for a moment the weary soldier vanished, replaced by something sadder. "Because I have pups on the homeworld, High Diplomat, and I do not want them to grow up in a war started by a lie. Kor speaks of honor, but he smells of rot." Rook looked at Edwin. "The ghost signal, it is not perfect. Nothing digital is. It lacks the breath, the pause between the thought and the sound. That is what you heard on the balcony, wasn't it?" "The breath, yes," Edwin said. "The intent." "Then listen for it," Rook said. "When the time comes, do not listen to the words. Listen to the breath. That is the only thing that cannot be stolen." Rook turned and vanished back into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. "Nera," Annie said, holstering her weapon. "The archivist. Her sanctuary is in the deep spire. It is the oldest part of the station." "Then we go," Imani said, grabbing her tablet. "I will stay here and try to loop the sensor feeds so Kor doesn't see you moving." Annie turned to Edwin. "This is dangerous, Edwin. If we go down there, there is no diplomatic immunity. If they catch us, we disappear." "I am already a disappointment to my species," Edwin said, a small smile touching his lips. "Might as well be a criminal, too." Annie didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Come." The journey to the deep spire was a descent into the subconscious of the station. They moved through maintenance shafts and service tunnels, avoiding the main corridors. The sleek, singing crystal of the upper levels gave way to rusted metal and dark, dripping pipes. The air grew colder, heavier. As they descended, Edwin began to feel it. At first, it was just a pressure behind his eyes, like a storm front moving in. Then it became a sound, a whisper. It wasn't a single voice. It was thousands. "Please, I didn't mean to coordinate, verify Sector 7. I love you, don't go kill the engines." Fragments of sentences. Shards of emotion. They swirled around him, ghost echoes bouncing off the metal walls. "Edwin," Annie stopped. She was looking at him with concern. "You are pale." "The station," Edwin gasped, rubbing his temples. "It is whispering. Can't you hear it?" "I hear the ventilation fans," Annie said. Nothing else. "It is the mnemonic foam," Edwin realized. "The whole station is lined with it. It absorbs sound. It absorbs memory. Down here, the insulation must be leaking. I am hearing the echoes of the last 50 years. He stumbled, and Annie caught him. Her grip was strong. "Focus on my voice," she commanded. "Edwin, look at me." He looked at her. Her amber eyes were sharp and clear in the gloom. "My voice is real," she said. "The rest is just dust. Ignore the dust." He nodded, focusing on the sound of her breathing, the rhythm of her heart that he could almost feel through her hand on his arm. It anchored him. They reached a heavy, circular door marked with a symbol that looked like a closed eye. Edwin used the iron key Rook had given him. It turned with a heavy thunk, and the door groaned open. The archive was a cavernous space, filled with rows of physical data towers, stacks of crystal drives that hummed with a low blue light. It smelled of old paper and ozone. Sitting at a desk in the center of the maze was a figure. Archivist Nera was a colonian, a turtle-like species known for their longevity and their absolute fanatical devotion to history. She was old, her shell scarred and pitted her skin the color of dried moss. She did not look up as they entered. "You are late," Nera said. Her voice was slow, deep like stones grinding together. "The timeline is fracturing. I have been expecting you." "Archivist," Annie said, bowing respectfully. "We need access to the core logs, the deleted ones." Nera looked up then. Her eyes were milky white, but she stared directly at Edwin. "The listener," she said. "The man who hears the spaces between the words. Come closer, human." Edwin stepped forward. "You know me." "I know all the voices," Nera said. She gestured to the towers around her. "The station forgets nothing. People delete files. Politicians scrub records. But the vibration remains. I keep the echoes." She tapped a claw on her desk. A hologram projected into the air. It was a waveform. Complex, jagged. "This is the voice of High Diplomat Vale," Nera said. "Recorded 3 days ago during a private practice session." The voice filled the room. It was Annie reciting the Vox Accord. It was perfect, resonant. Then Nera tapped the desk again. Another waveform appeared. It looked identical. "And this," Nera said, "is the voice of High Diplomat Vile, recorded yesterday, in the secure server room of Chancellor Corps." The voice played. "I hereby revoke the accord. The trust is broken. Let the galaxy burn." Annie gasped. "I never said that." "No," Nera agreed. "You did not. But the math says you did." She zoomed in on the waveform. At the microscopic level, the lines were too smooth, too perfect. "It is a construct," Edwin said, leaning in. "Look at the breath intake. It is a consistent 0.4 seconds every time. No living being breathes that consistently. Even a disciplined Vulpine varies by milliseconds depending on stress." "Correct," Nera said. "It is a forgery. A masterpiece, but a forgery." "We need to destroy it," Annie said. "You cannot," Nera said. "It has already been uploaded to the core's buffer. It is queued to play the moment you step onto the podium. If you try to delete it now, the system will detect the intrusion and lock down. The ceremony will be cancelled and the war begins." "So we are trapped," Annie said, her shoulders slumping. "If I speak, the ghost overwrites me. If I don't speak, the corridor collapses." "There is a third option," Nera said. She looked at Edwin. "The core validates truth based on resonance. It expects one voice, one frequency." Nera paused, her milky eyes narrowing. "But what if there were two voices speaking in perfect opposition? A counterharmony?" Edwin understood immediately. It was a concept in acoustic physics, destructive interference. If you play a sound, and then play the exact inverse of that sound at the same time, they cancel each other out. Silence. "But we don't want silence," Edwin said. "We want the truth." "You want to cancel the ghost," Nera corrected. "The ghost is locked to Annie's frequency. If Edwin speaks, if he speaks in a way that anchors her, that disrupts the perfect math of the clone." "I am a human," Edwin said. "My frequency is different." "Exactly," Nera said. "You are the anomaly, the glitch. If you speak with her, not over her, but with her, you introduce a variable the algorithm cannot predict. You can break the lock." "But I don't know the oath," Edwin said. Annie looked at him. "I can teach you, but it is forbidden. Only the High Diplomat can speak the oath." "Screw the rules," Edwin said. "I am already an embarrassment. Let's be a heresy." Nera reached into her desk and pulled out a small, translucent card. It pulsed with a faint white light. "This is a root access key," Nera said. "It will not delete the ghost, but it will allow you to enter the podium sphere together without the security barrier frying you. It is a one-way ticket. Once you are in, there are no do-overs." She slid the card across the desk to Annie. "If you want to ask why this is happening," Nera rumbled, looking at the shadows of the archive, "do not ask the politicians. Ask the fear. Someone is very afraid of peace, High Diplomat. Fear makes people build terrible machines." Annie took the card. She looked at Edwin. "We have 12 hours until the ceremony," she said. "Then we better start rehearsing," Edwin said. "I hope you have patience, Annie. My Vulpine accent is terrible." Annie looked at him, and for the first time, a genuine small smile touched her lips. "Your accent is atrocious," she said. "But your breath is honest. That will have to be enough." She squeezed his hand. "Come. We have a ghost to kill." They turned to leave the archive, leaving the old turtle and her towers of whispers behind. But as they walked back into the dark tunnels, Edwin felt the station watching them. The walls were still listening. But this time, he wasn't afraid of what they heard. He was ready to make some noise. The grand atrium of the glass orchard had transformed since the gala. The mood was no longer one of champagne and polite whispers. It had hardened into the brittle tension of a bowstring pulled back to its breaking point. At the center of the vast circular chamber stood the central tree. It was a masterpiece of bioarchitecture, a towering construct of translucent silicate and living cellular matter that reached all the way to the dome ceiling. Its leaves were not green, but a pale, shimmering opalescent white, each one tuned to a specific frequency of the emotional spectrum. It was the largest resonance fork in the galaxy. When the Vox Accord was spoken, the tree would catch the sound, amplify the truth within it, and broadcast a stabilization wave that would hold the slip-space corridor open for another 50 years. Today was the final rehearsal. Edwin Hart stood at the periphery of the delegation circle, trying to look like a decorative object. He wore a stiff gray suit that felt like armor. His hands were clasped behind his back, but his fingers were twitching. He could feel the hum of the station in the soles of his shoes. It felt aggressive today. The usual harmonious thrum had been replaced by a jagged, uneven vibration, like a heartbeat skipping every third beat. Annie Vale stood at the base of the tree. She looked small against the towering crystal branches, but her presence filled the room. She wore the ceremonial robes of the High Diplomat, a flowing garment of silver and white that made her look like a priestess of some ancient cold religion. Her face was a mask of absolute calm, but Edwin knew better. He watched the way her tail held perfectly still, not a single hair moving. That was not calm. That was rigor mortis levels of control. "Delegates," Chancellor Sable Kor announced. He stood on a raised platform to the right, overseeing the proceedings like a ringmaster. "We shall commence the calibration of the primary stanza. High Diplomat Vile, whenever you are ready." Kor's voice was smooth, but Edwin heard the underlying buzz, a frequency of anticipation. The Chancellor was waiting for something. Annie stepped up to the resonance podium. The microphone was not electronic. It was a carved piece of aerogel that floated in a magnetic field, designed to catch pure sound waves without digital distortion. She took a breath. Edwin held his own breath. He knew what they were planning to do. They were going to try to break the ghost. They were going to try to overlay Edwin's voice at the exact moment of the ceremony to disrupt the clone. But this was just a rehearsal. Annie had to speak alone. She had to walk the minefield without detonating it. "I speak for the silence between stars," Annie began. Her voice was clear, bell-like, projecting the perfect diction of high Vulpine galactic standard. The leaves of the central tree shimmered. A soft blue light began to pulse from the trunk. It was working. The resonance was clean. I speak for the blood that binds us, Annie continued, her volume rising slightly. The blue light deepened. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with static. I pledge the truth of my breath to thee. And then the world tore open. It did not happen with an explosion. It happened with a sound. As Annie shaped the word truth, a second sound slammed into the air. It was not a noise from the speakers. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the very air of the atrium. It was a voice. It was Annie's voice. But it was wrong. To the diplomats and guards, it sounded like a screech of feedback, a microphone malfunction that spiraled into a deafening whine. But Edwin heard it for what it was. He heard the layers. He heard Annie's real voice, warm and terrified, fighting against a synthetic overlay that was cold, mathematically perfect, and utterly soulless. The two sounds collided in the air, creating a sonic dissonance that was physically painful. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. High above a branch of the central tree shattered. Usually, the crystal flowers of the orchard bloomed in soft, flowing patterns when they heard harmony. Now, they reacted to the violence of the sound. All around the room, the crystal buds snapped open instantly. But they did not bloom into soft petals. They exploded into jagged, razor-sharp shards. The light in the room shifted from calming blue to a violent, strobing crimson. The air shrieked. It was the sound of glass, grinding on glass, amplified by 1,000 times. "My ears!" a voice screamed. To Edwin's left, the ambassador from the Hydra system collapsed. The aquatic diplomat clutched the side of his head, his gills flaring in panic. Thick, blue blood began to leak from his auditory canals, dripping onto the pristine white floor. "Cut the feed!" someone roared. Annie stumbled back from the podium, her hands flying to her throat. She looked horrified. The sound died as quickly as it had started, leaving a ringing silence that was heavy with the metallic taste of blood and ozone. Edwin started to run toward her, but a wall of security guards stepped in, blocking his path. "Stay back!" a guard barked, leveling a stun lance at Edwin's chest. "She is hurt," Edwin shouted, though he could see she wasn't physically injured. She was standing frozen, staring at the podium as if it had just bitten her. Sable Kor descended from his platform. He did not look shocked. He looked like a man who had just won a bet. He walked over to the Hydrus ambassador, signaled for medics, and then turned his gaze to Annie. "A tonal conflict," Kor announced, his voice projecting easily into the stunned silence. The system registered 2 distinct frequencies originating from a single source. A biometric impossibility. He walked toward Annie, stopping just outside her personal space. "It seems, High Diplomat, that your voice is no longer stable. The tree rejected you. It sensed the duality in your intent." "That was not me," Annie whispered. Her voice was shaking, but she held her ground. "That was a feedback loop, a system error." "Was it?" Kor asked, raising an eyebrow. He gestured to the bloody floor, where the ambassador had fallen. "The glass orchard does not make mistakes, Annie. It reflects the soul. And right now, your soul appears to be fractured." He turned to the gathered assembly, spreading his hands. "I cannot in good conscience allow this risk to continue. The Vox Accord requires absolute purity. If the High Diplomat speaks at the ceremony tomorrow with this corruption in her voice, the corridor will not just fail to open. It will collapse. We could all be killed." "You are stripping me of my rank," Annie asked. Her voice was deadly quiet. "I am suspending your speaking rights," Kor corrected, "for the safety of the station. Until a full investigation into your psychological and acoustic stability can be completed, you are grounded." It was a coup. A bloodless, sonic coup. Edwin waited for Annie to fight. He waited for her to scream that it was a setup, that Kor was using a clone, that the system was rigged. She was Annie Vile. She had negotiated peace treaties between species that ate each other's young. She did not roll over. But Annie did nothing. She stood there, her face pale, her lips pressed together so tightly They were white. She looked like someone holding the pin of a grenade between her teeth. If she opened her mouth to argue, she would blow everything up. "I understand," Annie said. The words were hollow. "Good," Kor said. He looked at the guards. "Escort the High Diplomat to her quarters. She is to remain there under heavy guard until the council decides on a replacement speaker." "And her husband?" a guard asked. Kor glanced at Edwin. There was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Let him go with her. He can comfort her in her disgrace. He is good at being ornamental." The walk back to the diplomatic quarters was a funeral procession. 4 guards surrounded them. Annie walked with her head high, but her energy was gone. She felt brittle, as if a strong breeze would shatter her into as many pieces as the crystal branch back in the atrium. They were shoved into their suite, and the door was magnetic locked from the outside. As soon as the lock clicked, Edwin spun on her. "Why didn't you fight him?" Edwin demanded. The anger had been building in his chest since the podium. "You stood there and let him call you broken. You let him blame you for hurting the ambassador." Annie walked to the window, looking out at the nebula. She didn't answer. "Annie." Edwin grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. "We know it is a ghost. We know it is a recording. Why didn't you tell them?" "Because that is exactly what he wanted me to do," Annie snapped. She pulled away from him, her eyes flashing with a sudden wild desperation. "Don't you see, Edwin? If I claimed there was a clone, I would have to prove it. And where is the proof in the core? Only Kor has access now, in the archives. If we mention Nera, he would have her executed for treason within the hour." She paced the room, her hands tangling in the fabric of her gown. "And worse," she continued, her voice trembling. "If I admit I know about the ghost, I admit that the Vox Accord is already compromised. The council would cancel the ceremony immediately. The corridor closes. War restarts. Kor wins either way." "So we just let him win?" Edwin asked. "No," Annie said. She stopped pacing. "We let him think he has won. We let him think I am broken. Because a broken enemy is an enemy you stop watching." A chime sounded from the bathroom. It was a specific, rhythmic chime, 3 short, 1 long. "Imani," Annie whispered. They rushed to the bathroom. Annie tapped the sensor on the ventilation grate. The grate hissed open, and the grease-smeared face of Dr. Imani Park appeared. She looked terrified. "You guys need better security," Imani whispered, pulling herself halfway out of the vent. "I bypassed the maglock with a spoon and a battery." "Imani," Edwin said. "Did you see the data spike?" "See it, I almost drowned in it," Imani said. She held up her datapad. When the feedback hit, the core didn't just reject Annie. It went into emergency copy mode. It sucked in every millisecond of that interaction. The panic in her voice. The tremor. The ghost absorbed it all. They were calibrating it, Edwin realized, feeling sick. The rehearsal wasn't about testing the system. It was about updating the clone. The ghost sounded too cold before. They needed Annie's fear to make it sound human. "Exactly," Imani said. "And now they have it. The ghost is perfect. It is 99.9% accurate. Even her own mother wouldn't be able to tell the difference." "So Kor has a perfect weapon," Annie said, leaning against the sink. "He can use the ghost to speak the dissolution command, and the station will think it is me crying out in despair." "We have to get back to Nera," Edwin said. "We need to find the source. If we can find the original splice, maybe we can prove it is a forgery." "We can't get out," Annie said. "There are guards at the door." "That is why I brought this," Imani said. She pulled a bundle of fabric from the vent. It was a maintenance uniform, gray-stained and smelling of hydraulic fluid. "And a fake work order for a toilet malfunction. Edwin puts this on, grabs my toolkit, and walks out with me. The guards won't look twice at a plumber." "What about Annie?" Edwin asked. "I stay," Annie said. "They are watching me too closely. If I vanish, the alarm goes up. But you are just the husband. You are the accessory. If you disappear for an hour, they might just think you went to find a drink." Edwin looked at the dirty jumpsuit. Then he looked at Annie. She looked so tired. The Ice Queen facade was cracking, revealing the woman underneath, who was carrying the weight of two worlds on her shoulders. "Fine," Edwin said. He grabbed the jumpsuit. "But if I get caught, I am telling them I was looking for a very specific type of wrench." He changed quickly. The jumpsuit was 2 sizes too big. He pulled a cap low over his eyes. "One thing," Edwin said, pausing as he grabbed the toolkit. He looked at Annie. "Back at the party, when you called me stupid, you said it was to save me." Annie looked up, meeting his eyes. "And today," Edwin continued, a bitter smile touching his lips, "you are sending me into a vent dressed as a janitor. You really have a way of making me feel dignified, Annie." "Call it stupid again," he added softly. "Just so I know we are still us." Annie stared at him. For a second, her expression crumbled. She reached out and touched his cheek, her claws, retracting fully, so only the soft pads of her fingers brushed his skin. "If you get used to it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I won't be able to breathe. Don't make me enjoy hurting you, Edwin. I am not strong enough for that." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. "Go." She pushed him gently toward the vent. "Bring me back a weapon." The ventilation shafts were cramped and hot. Edwin followed Imani, crawling on his hands and knees. "So," Imani grunted from ahead, "you and the Diplomat. You guys have a weird dynamic. Is the insulting each other thing a human mating ritual, or a Vulpine one?" "It is a survival ritual," Edwin muttered, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Where are we going? This isn't the way to the Deep Spire." "We can't go back to the Spire the same way," Imani said. "Core has patrols sweeping the lower levels. We have to go through the Archive's waste disposal chute. It is aromatic." "Fantastic," Edwin sighed. They dropped out of a chute into a dimly lit corridor in the security sector. This was where the station's administrative offices were. Imani led him to a side door marked Janitorial Supply. Inside, Rook was waiting. The Vulpine security officer looked worse than before. His uniform was rumpled, and he was pacing nervously. "You are late," Rook hissed. "The shift change is in 2 minutes." "Traffic was murder in the ventilation ducts," Edwin said, brushing dust off his borrowed jumpsuit. "Do you have the access codes?" Rook held up a datapad. "I have something better. I have the warrant." He handed the pad to Edwin. It was the digital arrest order Core had forced him to sign earlier. "Read the name," Rook said. Edwin squinted at the glowing text. "Subject, Edwin Hart. Species human. Charge acoustic sabotage." Then he looked at the signature block. It was authorized by Commander Rook. But under the authorization code, there was a discrepancy. One of the digits in Rook's service number was an O instead of a 0. "The system rejected it," Rook said, a grim smile showing his teeth. "Administrative error. The warrant is in a processing loop. Technically, you are not a fugitive, Edwin. You are a clerical error. That gives us about 3 hours before someone notices and manually overrides it." "You risked your career for a typo?" Edwin asked, impressed. "I risked my career when I decided not to arrest you on the balcony," Rook said. "This is just paperwork." He handed Edwin a keycard. "This will get you into the sublevel where Nera is waiting. I can't go with you. I have to lead a patrol to the upper decks to keep Core's mercenaries busy. If anyone asks, I am hunting for the human who slipped his leash." "Thank you, Rook," Edwin said. "Don't thank me," Rook said, turning to the door. "Just don't make me have to shoot you later. I hate filling out the casualty forms." Edwin and Imani descended into the bowels of the station again. The air grew colder, smelling of stale ozone and ancient dust. They found Archivist Nera in a different section of the archive, this time a section that wasn't on any map. It was a circular room, filled with what looked like glass coffins. Inside, each coffin was a swirling mist of light. "The graveyard of words," Nera announced from the shadows. The old Colonian moved her hover chair forward. This is where the station keeps the things it tries to forget. I thought the station remembered everything, Edwin said. It does, Nara said. But like any sentient mind, it has things it is ashamed of. Decisions it regrets. Lies it was forced to tell. It deletes them from the active memory, but nothing is ever truly gone. It just gets buried. She rolled over to one of the glass cases. You asked to see the origin of the ghost, Nara said. I found it. It was not created last week. It was not created last month. She tapped the glass. The mist swirled and formed a waveform. This file is dated 5 years ago, Nara said. Edwin stared at the date. 5 years. That is when Annie was first appointed as a junior diplomat. Listen, Nara commanded. The audio played. It was younger, brighter, less guarded than the Annie he knew. I, Annie Vile, accept this commission. I promise to serve. Then the audio glitched. A second voice cut in. It was a male voice, cold, clinical. Sample accepted. Isolate phonemes. Begin replication matrix. Project Echo. Project Echo, Imani whispered. I have heard rumors of that. It was a Black Ops project funded by the Vulpine military. They wanted to create perfect voice masks for spies. It gets worse, Nara said. She tapped the glass again. A new recording played. This one was jagged, filled with static. No, please, I don't want to say it. It was Annie. But she sounded like she was in pain. Say it again, the cold male voice ordered. With more conviction. Say I betray you. I betray you, Annie sobbed on the recording. Edwin felt his hands curl into fists. What is this? Was she tortured? No, Nara said softly. Look at the timestamp. Edwin looked. The timestamp was yesterday. But you said the file was 5 years old, Edwin said, confused. The file is 5 years old, Nara explained. The structure, the algorithm. But the content is being stitched together across time. They have been recording her for 5 years. Every phone call, every private murmur, every cry of pain. But this, Nara pointed to the sobbing recording. This piece isn't from a surveillance bug. This was recorded directly into the core's interface. But Annie hasn't been to the core, Imani argued. Only authorized personnel, Imani stopped. She looked at Edwin. The medical bay, Edwin realized. 3 days ago, when she had her annual physical, they sedated her. They didn't just sedate her, Nara said. They induced a nightmare state. They made her dream of her worst fears and they recorded her vocal reactions. That is why the ghost sounds so real now. It is built on her subconscious terror. Edwin felt a wave of nausea. It was a violation deeper than any physical assault. They had stolen her nightmares to build a weapon that would destroy her life's work. Who? Edwin asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. Who is the male voice? Nara adjusted the frequency filters. She stripped away the distortion on the cold voice. Say it again, with more conviction. Edwin recognized the voice immediately. It wasn't Sable Core. Core was a politician. He was loud. This voice was quiet, efficient. It was the voice of the station's chief medical officer, Dr. Eris Thorne. A man Edwin had shaken hands with at the gala. A man who had smiled and told Annie she looked healthy. Thorne, Edwin hissed. He is the architect. Core is the face, Nara agreed. Thorne is the technician. He has been harvesting voice data from diplomats for years during their medical exams. Annie isn't the first. She is just the most important. We have to stop him, Imani said. If Thorne is controlling the ghost, he must be doing it from somewhere. The MedCore, Nara said. There is a secondary acoustic server in the medical wing. That is where the ghost lives. Edwin grabbed the datapad with the evidence. Imani, Edwin said. Can you hack the MedCore? If I can get close enough, Imani said. But it will be heavily guarded. I don't need to get inside, Edwin said. He looked at the waveform of Annie sobbing. I just need to get a message to Annie. I need her to know she isn't crazy. I need her to know that the voice she heard wasn't her failing. It was a theft. He turned to Nera. Can you broadcast to her quarters? Just a narrow beam. I can try, Nera said. But they will trace it. Let them, Edwin said. I am done hiding in vents. If we are going to break this, we need to be loud. He leaned into the microphone Nera offered. He didn't speak in code. He didn't use a disguise. He spoke in English, clear and unwavering. Annie, it is me. It is not your fault, it is Thorn. They stole your voice while you slept. But they didn't steal your breath. Do you hear me? The ghost doesn't breathe like you. Remember the balcony. Remember the check. He took a deep breath. Vachra, he whispered. He waited. For a long moment there was only static. Then, from the speakers, a single word came back. It was faint, distorted by the jamming signal, but it was there. Kashil, she heard him. She is ready, Edwin said. He looked at Imani and Nera. Let's go wreck a medical bay. The game had changed. It was no longer about proving innocence. It was about retrieving a stolen soul. And Edwin Hart was coming for the doctor who had dared to touch his wife's nightmares. The safe house was not a fortress. It was a wound in the station's side that had never healed properly. Located in the structural dead zone between the diplomatic spire and the waste heat exchangers, the room vibrated with a constant, tooth-rattling thrum. The walls were stripped bare of the elegant, sound-absorbing mnemonic foam that lined the upper levels. Here, the metal was exposed, scarred by welding burns, and smelling of ozone and old coolant. Edwin Hart sat on a crate of hydraulic fluid, his hands clasped loosely between his knees. He was watching archivist Nera. The ancient Colonian had connected her mobile interface to a rusted data port in the wall, her milky eyes moving rapidly as she communed with the station's subconscious. Dr. Imani Park was pacing the small perimeter, kicking at loose bolts. Annie Vale stood by the heavy blast door, her arms crossed, her silhouette sharp against the dim emergency lighting. She had not spoken since they left the graveyard of words. The station is in pain, Nera said. Her voice was like grinding tectonic plates, low and resonant. She did not turn around. I have bypassed the encryption on the medical logs. What Dr. Thorne and Chancellor Core are doing is not just theft. It is vivisection. Edwin looked up. Explain. Nera projected a hologram into the center of the room. It was a wireframe representation of the glass orchard's core, the massive biocrystalline tree that anchored the slipspace corridor. Usually, the representation pulsated with a soft, rhythmic blue light, the visual translation of harmony. Now, it looked like it was seizing. Jagged spikes of red and violet shot through the trunk, distorting the branches. The core was designed to amplify emotional truth, Nera explained. It relies on the harmony of intent. When a diplomat speaks a vow, the core samples their heart rate, their galvanic skin response, and the microtremors in their larynx. If the physical data matches the spoken word, the core sings, and the corridor opens. We know this, Annie said, her voice tight. That is the basis of the Vox Accord. Yes, Nera continued. But Core has inverted the algorithm. He is feeding the Core a paradox. He is using the ghost, the digital clone of your voice, to feed the Core perfect mathematical data, while simultaneously feeding it the raw, harvested audio of your fear and pain. Nera tapped a claw on the console. The hologram shifted. The Core is confused. It cannot reconcile the perfect voice with the terrified biology. It is inducing a state of hyper-rejection. The station is trying to purge the dissonance. That is why the crystals exploded in the atrium. That is why the ambassador's ears bled. The station isn't just rejecting the speaker. It is lashing out at the listeners. He is turning the station into a punishment machine. Edwin realized a cold knot forming in his stomach. If anyone speaks against him, if anyone's voice doesn't align with his perfect clone, the station will punish them. He is not just stealing the election, Annie. He is building a dictatorship where dissent literally causes physical pain. Effective, Annie murmured. Control the voice, control the reality. It is worse, Nara rumbled. If the High Diplomat takes the podium tomorrow and the ghost takes over, the resulting dissonance won't just hurt people. It will create a sonic feedback loop strong enough to liquefy the internal organs of everyone in the Grand Atrium. Core plans to assassinate the entire diplomatic council, in one stroke, blame it on your instability, and emerge as the sole survivor to restore order. The silence in the room was heavy. So, Dr. Imani Park said, stopping her pacing, we are not just saving a peace treaty. We are stopping a massacre. No pressure. Annie turned from the door. Her face was pale. The silver tips of her ears flattened against her skull. She looked at Edwin and, for a moment, the icy diplomat was gone. All that was left was a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. I cannot do it, she said softly. Edwin, I cannot go up there. If I speak, the ghost activates. If I don't speak, the corridor collapses. Either way, I fail. You are not going to fail, Edwin said, standing up. Because you are not going to be the only one speaking. He walked over to her. He wanted to touch her, to smooth the fur on her arm, but he knew the rules. Not here. Not yet. Why me? Edwin asked. It was the question that had been burning in his throat since the balcony. Annie, look at me. Why did you bring me here? Why did you marry me? There are 1,000 phonetic experts in the Federation. There are Vulpine sound monks who can hear a leaf fall on a different planet. Why did you pick a human with a history of failure? Annie looked away. Because you are convenient. Because a human husband looks weak, and that makes me look non-threatening. Bullshit, Edwin said. The swear word felt flat in the room. Core called me a contaminant, but Nara called me a listener. You checked my line on the balcony because you knew I would understand the code. You didn't pick me because I was weak. You picked me because I hear things other people don't. Annie remained silent for a long count of 10 seconds. Finally, she let out a long, shuddering breath. Because you hear the cracks, she whispered. She turned to face him fully. Most people listen to the melody, Edwin. You listen for the flaw. I read your file. The Viridia disaster. 10 years ago. Edwin flinched. He stepped back, his back hitting the cold metal of a support strut. Don't. You were the black box analyst. Annie pressed on her eyes, locking onto him. The transport ship crashed. 300 dead. The official report said it was pilot error. The pilot was drunk, but you listened to the cockpit voice recorder. I heard the stress fracture, Edwin said, his voice hollow. The memory washed over him, the smell of burning plastic, the endless hours in the dark room with headphones on, listening to the screaming. I heard the metal groaning 3 minutes before the crash. It wasn't the pilot. It was the hull. It was a manufacturing defect. And you testified, Annie said. And I was wrong, Edwin snapped. The inquiry board brought in 5 other experts. They said it was just atmospheric noise. They said I was projecting. They crucified the pilot's memory. His family lost their pension. Because I heard something that wasn't there. But it was there, Annie said fiercely. 2 years later, they found the same defect in the rest of the fleet. You were right, Edwin. You were right, and the world was deaf. It didn't matter, Edwin shouted. The damage was done. I destroyed that family's reputation because I couldn't prove what I heard. That is why I quit. That is why I stopped analyzing serious cases. I am a joke, Annie. I teach diction to politicians. I don't save lives. I don't need you to be perfect, Annie said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. She stepped close, invading his personal space, smelling of rain and ozone. I don't need a hero, Edwin. I have plenty of heroes. They are all dead or working for Core. I need someone who stands on the right side of the truth even when it hurts. Even when no one believes him. She reached out and took his hand. Her claws were retracted, her grip strong. I am trapped, Edwin, between the Vox Accord and your life. Core told me that if I deviated from the script, if I tried to warn anyone, he would harvest you next. He said he would peel your voice away layer by layer until you couldn't even beg for mercy. That is why I pushed you away. That is why I called you stupid. Because if you are worthless to me, you are safe. Edwin looked at her. He saw the terror she had been hiding under the diplomatic frost. She wasn't a nice queen. She was a woman holding a shield over his head while the sky fell. You are terrible at protecting people, Edwin said, a small, cracked smile forming on his lips. You are supposed to put fragile things in a box. No, Annie said, a glint of the old fire returning to her eyes. Fragile things go in a box. I have to watch. Because you have a habit of walking into fire. Okay, Edwin said. He squeezed her hand. So we are walking into the fire together. What is the plan? Dr. Imani Park cleared her throat loudly from the corner. As touching as this interspecies melodrama is, Imani said, waving a schematic, we have a physics problem to solve. If we want to kill the ghost, we need to break the algorithm. She spread the blueprints of the Vox Accord podium on the floor. The ghost is a predictive algorithm, Imani explained. It anticipates Annie's vocal pattern based on millions of data points. It knows what she is going to say before she says it. It is like a shadow that moves before the object. So, we need to do something unpredictable, Edwin said. We need a counter-harmony, Imani corrected. In acoustic engineering, if you want to silence a sound, you play its inverse wave. But we don't want silence. We want to expose the fake. She pointed to the center of the podium. Edwin, you are going to stand with her. When the ghost activates, it will try to lock onto Annie's fundamental frequency. You need to provide a discordant harmonic. You need to speak the Vulpine oath, but you need to speak it differently. Differently, how? Edwin asked. With a bad accent. No, Imani said. With a different emotional intent. The ghost is built on fear and cold command. Annie needs to speak with authority. But you, Edwin, you need to speak with love. Edwin blinked. Love. It is a frequency, Nara rumbled from her console. The core can distinguish it. Fear constricts the vocal cords. Love relaxes them. If you recite the oath in perfect synchronization with Annie, but with a fundamentally opposing emotional resonance, the ghost won't be able to lock on. It will try to average the two signals and tear itself apart. It is the twin flame protocol, Imani said. Theoretically possible. Never tested. Risk of catastrophic head explosion roughly 40%. I like those odds, Edwin lied. The heavy blast door groaned. Edwin spun around, grabbing a heavy wrench from the crate. Annie drew her concealed energy pistol in a blur of motion. The door creaked open. A hand waved a white piece of cloth tied to a baton. Don't shoot, a voice called out. I am allergic to plasma burns. Rook slipped inside. The Vulpine security officer looked exhausted. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, and there was a smear of blue blood on his cheek. Rook, Annie lowered her weapon. Did you lose them? I sent the patrol to the hydroponics bay, Rook said, leaning against the doorframe to catch his breath. Told them I saw a human-shaped blur stealing vegetables. They are currently arresting a very confused gardener. Rook reached into his vest and pulled out a small, spherical device. He rolled it across the floor to Edwin. Schematics, Rook said. For the sonic cameras in the Grand Atrium, Core has rigged them to focus exclusively on the podium. Blind spots are marked in red. If you stand in the red zones, the ghost has a harder time tracking your biometrics. Why are you doing this, Rook? Edwin asked, picking up the device. You are Core's head of security. If this goes wrong, you go down with us. Rook spat on the floor. I joined the guard to protect the pack, Mr. Hart. Not to help a politician turn our history into a weapon. He looked at Annie. Core wears a scent called Dominion. It costs 500 credits an ounce. It smells like synthetic musk and ego. I do not like being a bloodhound for a man who wears perfume to hide the smell of his own rot. He will kill you if he finds out, Annie warned. He has to catch me first, Rook said. I am going back to the control room. I will try to delay the security override on the podium. It will buy you maybe 30 seconds. Use them well. Rook nodded to them, once then slipped back out into the shadows. 30 seconds, Edwin said. To break a ghost and save a galaxy. Standard Tuesday. We have a problem, Annie said. She was looking at the plan Imani had laid out. Core knows Edwin is a threat. If he sees Edwin step onto that podium, he won't wait for the ghost. He will cut the microphone, or shoot him. Then we need a distraction, Edwin said. Or we need to make him think I am not a threat until it is too late. I should just announce it, Edwin said, pacing. We go live before the ceremony. I tell the whole station I speak Vulpine. I tell them I heard the ghost. If the public knows, Core can't kill me without making me a martyr. No, Annie slammed her hand on the crate. Absolutely not. If you reveal you speak Vulpine now, Core will panic. He won't just kill you. He will vent the atmosphere in this entire sector to make sure you are silenced. He will claim it was a terrorist containment. So I am supposed to just walk up there and hope he doesn't notice the human standing next to the High Diplomat, Edwin argued. Yes, Annie said. You are the husband. You are the prop. You are there to hold my hand and look supportive. That is the protocol. Husbands are allowed on the podium during the oath of union. Core will think you are just there for the photo op. He is arrogant, Edwin. He doesn't think you are a player. He thinks you are a pet. A pet, Edwin muttered. Great. I will practice my begging. Edwin, Annie said, her voice softening. I am serious. You have to be invisible until the moment you open your mouth. You have to let him believe he is one. That is the only way we get close enough to the mic. Edwin looked at her. He saw the calculation in her eyes, but he also saw the desperate need for him to trust her. She was managing him, yes, but she was managing him to keep him alive. Fine, Edwin said. I will be the invisible man. But when this is over, we are renegotiating the terms of this marriage. I want at least 3 days a week where I don't have to save the universe. Deal, Annie said. Imani clapped her hands. All right, lovebirds. Rehearsal time. Edwin, if you botch the pronunciation of Grave Covenant, we all explode. So lip trills. Now. The hours passed in a blur of phonetic drills and technical planning. Nera monitored the core's instability, which was growing exponentially. The station groaned around them, the metal plates shifting as the stress of the ghost signal pressed against the physical reality of the structure. By the time the artificial dawn cycle began, Edwin's throat was raw. He had memorized the Vulpine Oath of Accord, a complex guttural poem that required him to use muscles in his throat he didn't know he had. Again, Annie ordered. Shakal nor vax et vakra, Edwin recited. No, Annie corrected. Soft kosh. You are sounding like a Klingon with a cold. It needs to flow. Shakal. Shakal, Edwin repeated. Better, Annie said. Remember the intent. You are not declaring war. You are declaring unity. You are offering a bridge. I am offering a bridge to a woman who called me stupid, Edwin smiled tiredly. A term of endearment, Annie deadpanned. But her tail flicked, a sign of amusement. Suddenly, the emergency lights in the safe house flashed from amber to red. Time is up, Nera announced. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. Security teams are sweeping the lower levels. You must go. Dr. Imani Park handed Edwin a small earpiece. This is a bone conduction link. I will be on the line counting down the frequency shifts. When I say mark, you speak. Do not hesitate. If you are a millisecond late, the ghost wins. Got it, Edwin said, fitting the device into his ear. They prepared to leave. Annie adjusted her ceremonial robes, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles. She looked regal, terrifying, and utterly alone. Edwin stepped up beside her. He adjusted his own collar, the same stiff, formal wear he had worn to the gala. It felt like a costume for a play he hadn't auditioned for. "Annie," Edwin said. She turned to him. The mask was back in place. She was high diplomat Vial again. "We move quickly," she said. "Head down. Follow my lead. Do not engage with Core." "Annie," Edwin said again louder. She stopped. "We are going to make it," he said. She looked at him, and for a second the mask slipped. She looked young. She looked scared. She reached up and grabbed the lapels of his jacket, pulling him down until their foreheads were almost touching. It was an intimate gesture, shocking in its intensity. She leaned toward his ear. Her breath was warm against his skin. "Kaelin Vor," she whispered. Edwin froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. His mind, the mind of a translator, instantly parsed the syntax, the vocabulary, the archaic root structure. Kaelin, a term from the pre-industrial Vulpine era. It meant the anchor, the stone you tie yourself to when the river tries to wash you away. Vor, eternal, unbreaking. But there was a second layer. In the modern dialect, Kaelin was also the word for his eyes went wide. He pulled back to look at her, his mouth opening to ask the question that suddenly roared in his head. "Annie, did you just—" She placed a finger firmly over his lips. Her claw pricked his skin just enough to sting. "Not now," she said. Her voice was fierce, commanding and trembling with suppressed emotion. "Leave it for the end. If we survive, you can ask. If we die, you know." She pulled away, turning her back to him before he could see the flush of color under her fur. "Now walk," she commanded, "and try not to trip over your own feet, husband." Edwin stood there for a heartbeat, his pulse thundering in his ears. The Vulpine phrase echoed in his mind. Kaelin Vor, my permanent anchor, my chosen fate. It wasn't just a tactical instruction. It was a confession. He took a deep breath, the fear in his chest replaced by a sudden burning clarity. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his spine, and followed her out into the corridor. He was done being the prop. He was done being the victim of his own ears. The station was screaming, the ghost was waiting, and Edwin Hart was ready to sing back. The grand atrium of the glass orchard was no longer a room. It was the inside of a held breath. The translucent dome above revealed the nebula in all its violent glory, swirls of purple and bruised gold stretching out into infinity. Below the central tree stood like a pillar of frozen lightning. Its leaves, usually a soothing opalescent white, were currently pulsing with a faint, nervous gray light. The biocrystalline structure could feel the tension in the room. It was feeding on the adrenaline of the 300 delegates gathered in the circle. Edwin Hart stood beside Annie Vale at the base of the podium. He could feel the vibration of the floorboards through the soles of his shoes. It wasn't a mechanical hum. It was a shivering. The station was terrified. Sable Core stood on the raised dais, looking down at them like a god inspecting a particularly disappointing harvest. He wore ceremonial robes of deep crimson, heavy with gold embroidery that caught the light. His tail swayed with a hypnotic predatory rhythm. "Delegates of the Council," Core's voice boomed, amplified, not by speakers, but by the acoustic geometry of the room itself. "We stand at the precipice of history. The Vox Accord is the only thing keeping the slipspace corridor from collapsing. It requires absolute purity of intent, absolute truth." He turned his gaze to Annie. His eyes were cold, calculating slits. "But truth," Core continued his voice, dropping to a theatrical whisper, "is a rare commodity, especially from those who claim to lead us." Annie stood rigid. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of diplomatic steel. But Edwin, standing just behind her shoulder, could see the tiny tremor in the fur on her neck. She was waiting for the blow. "I have received disturbing intelligence," Core announced. He raised a hand, and a holographic emitter flickered to life above the crowd. "Evidence that the High Diplomat has compromised the integrity of this station. evidence that she intends to sabotage the corridor. "That is a lie," Edwin whispered, though no one but Annie could hear him. "Silence," Annie breathed. "Wait for the rhythm," Core gestured. A sound filled the atrium. It was a recording. It was loud, crisp, and undeniable. "I am tired of the piece," Annie's voice echoed through the hall. It was her voice, perfect in pitch, perfect in timbre. "Let the corridor collapse. Let the fleets burn. I will build a new empire from the ashes." The crowd gasped. The sound was a physical blow. Immediately the glass orchard reacted. The gray light of the central tree turned a violent, sickly green, the color of toxicity. The crystal ferns lining the walls snapped their leaves shut with a sound like 1,000 cracking whips. The air pressure in the room dropped sharply, making ears pop. Warning. The station's automated voice intoned, sounding not like a machine, but like a choir of angry spirits. Dissonance detected. Integrity compromised. Initiating punishment protocol. A high-pitched whine began to rise from the floor. It was the frequency of pain. Several delegates covered their ears. "You hear it," Core shouted over the rising whine. "The station rejects her. It tastes her betrayal." He pointed a claw at Annie. "Explain yourself, High Diplomat, or step down and let a true patriot save us." This was the trap. If Annie spoke to defend herself, the ghost algorithm would overlay her voice, twisting her words into the dissolution command. If she stayed silent, Core would execute her for treason on the spot. Annie turned. She didn't look at Core. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Edwin. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. To the watching crowd, she looked like a cornered animal turning on the weakest member of the pack. She looked like she was about to sacrifice him. She took a step toward him, her lip curling in what looked like a snarl. "Vakra," she spat the word at him. "Stupid." The word rang out in the terrified silence of the atrium. It was loud. It was harsh. It was filled with contempt. The crowd watched confused. Why was she insulting her husband? But Edwin didn't flinch. Time seemed to slow down. He didn't hear the insult. He heard the phonetics. He analyzed the breath. She had hit the first syllable hard, Vok expelling air from the chest. But the second syllable, raw, wasn't a downward slide of dismissal. It was an upward lift, a syncopated beat. It was a rhythmic hole waiting to be filled. It wasn't a word. It was a count-in. 1, 2, 3. Edwin's fear evaporated. He wasn't the trophy husband anymore. He was the listener. And he knew his cue. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between Annie and the podium. He looked up at the towering, angry crystal tree. And he spoke. "Kaishil, I am here." He didn't whisper it. He projected it. He used the diaphragm control of an opera singer, throwing the Vulpine word into the acoustic sweet spot of the room. The effect was instantaneous. The rising whine of the punishment protocol cut out. Silence slammed into the room. The central tree froze. The pulsing green light stalled, flickering uncertainly. The station's core was a biocomputer built to analyze patterns. It expected Annie's voice. It expected the ghost. It expected the mathematical perfection of a clone. It did not expect a human male to speak High Vulpine with the perfect distinct accent of the northern clans. It was an anomaly, a variable the algorithm couldn't process. "What?" Core stepped back, his composure cracking. "What did he say?" "Now," Dr. Imani Park's voice screamed in Edwin's earpiece. Boom! A deep, resonant bass note shook the floor. Imani had activated the counter-resonance generator in the lower levels. It wasn't a sound you could hear. It was a sound you felt in your teeth. At the same moment, the holographic screens around the atrium hijacked themselves. The fake recording of Annie vanished. In its place, a new sound began to play. "Please, I don't want to say it." It was the sound of sobbing. It was the sound of Annie, drugged and terrified, being tortured in the medical bay. "Say it again," Dr. Thorne's cold voice ordered on the recording. Say, I betray you. The crowd murmured, a wave of shock rippling through the delegates. This is a trick, Kor roared, his eyes wild. The human is jamming the signal, seize him. The security guards surged forward, stun batons crackling. Hold! A voice boomed from the balcony. Rook stood there holding a heavy pulse rifle. Behind him were a dozen loyal guards. Any guard who takes another step, Rook shouted, will be answering to me, and I am in a very bad mood. The security team hesitated. They looked at Kor, then at Rook. They lowered their weapons. On the dais, Kor was losing control. He looked at the central tree. The light was shifting from green to a confused, swirling gray. The ghost algorithm was trying to recalibrate, trying to find a voice to latch onto. You think this saves you, Kor snarled at Edwin. You have merely confused the machine. It needs a truth, Mr. Hart. If it cannot find one, it will purge us all. Kor lunged toward the podium. He grabbed the resonance mic. I command the core to stabilize, Kor shouted. I am the voice of order. The tree flashed red. A blast of sonic feedback knocked Kor backward. He scrambled up, blood trickling from his nose. The machine wouldn't accept him. He wasn't the designated speaker. He turned his eyes to Edwin. A manic idea formed in his gaze. You, Kor hissed. You are the anomaly. The core is listening to you because you broke the pattern. Kor pulled a jagged crystal shard from his pocket, a piece of the broken tree. He lunged at Edwin, grabbing him by the collar and shoving the shard against Edwin's throat. Speak, Kor screamed, spraying spittle in Edwin's face. Speak the truth, human. Tell the station you are afraid. Tell it you are weak. Give it something to anchor to so I can overwrite it. Kor was trying to force a truth lock. If Edwin screamed in genuine fear, the core would accept the raw emotion as an anchor point. Once the connection was made, Kor could feed the ghost signal in through the open channel and crush them. Edwin felt the sharp edge of the crystal digging into his skin. He felt the cold radiation of Kor's panic. He opened his mouth. But he couldn't speak. The pressure was too great. The fear was choking him. Then a hand touched his forehead. It was a soft touch, warm, fur against skin. Annie. She didn't pull Kor away. She didn't attack. She simply stepped into the danger, pressing her forehead against Edwin's, ignoring the madman with the knife at his throat. She looked into Edwin's eyes. The world narrowed down to just the two of them. The shouting crowd, the screaming station, the knife. It all faded into background noise. She took a breath. A strange, shuddering breath. Vakra, she whispered. Stupid. But the intonation was different. The first time on the balcony, it had been a question. Are you listening? The second time, moments ago, it had been a rhythm. 1-2 start. This time, the pitch started low and slid up into a soft, airy whistle. It was a sound Edwin had never heard her use, but he knew the grammar. He knew the root. It was the slipping tone. In Vulpine mechanics, when a force is too strong to oppose, you don't fight it. You slide past it. You lubricate the friction. She wasn't telling him to fight the core. She was telling him to let go. Don't try to control the sound. Let the sound move through you. Edwin understood. He didn't need to be strong. He didn't need to be a hero. He just needed to be the open door. He closed his eyes. He felt the vibration of the station. He felt Annie's pulse against his forehead. Let go, he whispered in English. He began to recite. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was the Vox Accord, the oath of union. Shakal nor Vax, Annie joined him instantly. Et Vakra nor. They spoke in unison. But they were not speaking the same way. Annie's voice was steel. It was the voice of a leader, demanding order, projecting the authority of the state. Edwin's voice was velvet. It was the voice of a husband, offering acceptance, projecting the warmth of the hearth. It was the perfect acoustic paradox. Authority and love. Discipline and chaos. The core didn't know what to do with it. The ghost algorithm designed to mimic Annie's fear tried to lock onto the signal. It found Annie's authority, but when it tried to replicate it, it crashed into Edwin's love. It was like trying to mix oil and water in a sonic centrifuge. Screech. A terrible digital tearing sound ripped through the speakers. The ghost was tearing itself apart. "No!" Core screamed. The feedback from the microphone, which was still live near them, hit him. Since he was holding Edwin, the source of the harmony, the dissonance traveled through him. Core was thrown backward, as if hit by a truck. He slid across the polished floor, crashing into the base of the central tree. Edwin and Annie didn't stop. "We bind the dark with light," they recited, switching seamlessly to galactic standard, their voices climbing in pitch. "We bind the silence with breath." The central tree began to glow. The sickly green vanished. The red vanished. A pure, blinding white light erupted from the crystal trunk. It wasn't painful. It was warm. It washed over the crowd, over the guards, over the station. The floor stopped shaking. The whine died. Instead, a single perfect musical note rang out, a C major chord that seemed to go on forever. Above them, through the dome, the nebula swirled. The slipspace corridor, which had been flickering like a dying bulb, suddenly snapped open. It was a perfect circle of stable blue energy. The accord was sealed. Annie and Edwin stopped speaking. They stood there, forehead to forehead, breathing hard in the silence. Slowly, the white light faded to a gentle ambient glow. It listened," Edwin whispered, opening his eyes. "It listened to us," Annie corrected softly. A sound of movement broke the moment. Sable Core was trying to stand up. He looked ragged, his robes torn. He stared at the tree with hatred. "You cheated," Core rasped. "You corrupted the purity a human cannot sign the accord. It is invalid." "The station disagrees," a deep voice rumbled. Archivist Nera rolled into the atrium, her hover chair humming. She pointed a claw at the crystal leaves of the tree. They were glowing with a soft, pulsing rhythm. "The core has rewritten the protocol," Nera announced. "It no longer requires a single frequency. It has adapted to a dual harmonic structure. It seems the station prefers a duet." "Arrest him," Rook ordered. The guards moved in on Core. The Chancellor didn't fight. He just looked at Edwin with pure bafflement. "How?" Core muttered as they cuffed him. "He is just a mimic, a parrot." Annie turned to face Core. She smoothed her robes, regaining every inch of her diplomatic stature. "He is not a parrot, Chancellor," she said coldly. "He is a tuner. And you were out of key." As they dragged Core away, the station's automated voice chimed. This time, it was smooth and polite. "Accord verified. Stability at 100%. Thank you for your patience." The crowd erupted, not in applause but in the chaotic, relieved babble of survivors. Annie didn't look at the crowd. She grabbed Edwin's hand. "Come," she said, "before they try to make us give a speech." They found refuge on the upper observation deck an hour later. The reception was raging below, a celebration of peace and survival. But up here it was quiet. The stars looked steady again. Edwin leaned against the railing, holding a glass of water. His hands were finally starting to stop shaking. Annie stood next to him. She had ditched the ceremonial outer robe, standing in her simple silk tunic. She looked smaller, softer. "We did it," Edwin said, looking at the stable blue ring of the corridor in the distance. "We did," Annie agreed. She took a sip of her own drink. "You were adequate," Edwin laughed. A real laugh. "Adequate, I think I hit a high E that shattered a window." "It was an E-flat," Annie corrected automatically. "But it worked." She fell silent. She swirled the liquid in her glass, watching the vortex. "Edwin," she said. Her voice was hesitant. "Yeah, about the Vulpine." Edwin stiffened slightly. "Right. I guess I should explain. I started learning about 3 years ago. I bought these illegal audio courses from a smuggler in the Hydrus Belt. I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary, but then I realized how complex it was, so I kept practicing. And then— I know, Annie interrupted. Edwin stopped. He turned to look at her. What? Annie didn't look at him. She looked at the stars. I have known for 3 years, Edwin. Since the second month you started. Edwin stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Did you know, but how I practiced in the soundproof basement, I wore headphones. You talk in your sleep, Annie said dryly. And your accent was terrible. You kept muttering, "Where is the bathroom?" in the dialect of the Southern war priests. It was very confusing. Edwin felt his face heat up. You knew? The whole time? Yes. Then, why didn't you say anything? Edwin asked. Why did you let me keep it a secret? Annie turned to him. Her expression was serious, devoid of any mockery. Because of who I am, Edwin. I am a target. Every diplomat, every assassin, every spy in the sector watches me. They watch my weaknesses. If they knew my husband was a linguistic genius who could understand their encrypted whispers, you wouldn't be a husband. You would be a threat. She stepped closer to him. I needed them to think you were stupid, she whispered. I needed you to be safe. So I let you play your game. I pretended to be annoyed. I pretended you were just a clumsy human who broke things. Edwin's mind reeled. He thought back to every time she had rolled her eyes at him. Every time she had sighed and translated something for him. The insults, Edwin realized. Calling me stupid in Vulpine wasn't just on the balcony. You've been doing it for years at parties. Yes, Annie admitted. Whenever I felt a threat, whenever a spy was too close, I would turn to you and say something insulting in Vulpine. To them, it looked like marital strife. To me, it was a way of clearing the room. A way of making you look small, so they wouldn't look at you. But on the balcony, Edwin said, you used it as a code. I took a risk, Annie said. I hoped that after 3 years you were smart enough to hear the tone, not the word. I hoped you were listening to me, not the dictionary. She looked down at her hands. I am sorry, Edwin. I made you feel small to keep you alive. It was a cruel kindness. Edwin looked at this woman, this brilliant, terrifying, complex alien woman who had spent 3 years protecting him by letting him think she was annoyed by him. He felt a bubble of laughter rise in his chest. You are unbelievable, he said, shaking his head. So all those times you called me a clumsy oaf in front of the ambassador. There was a sniper in the ventilation duct, Annie said casually. I needed you to duck. And when you called me brainless at the state dinner, your wine was poisoned. I needed an excuse to knock it out of your hand. Edwin stared at her. You knocked it over and yelled at me for staining the tablecloth. It worked, didn't it? Edwin couldn't help it. He laughed. He laughed until his ribs hurt. It was absurd. It was twisted. It was the most romantic thing he had ever heard. He reached out and took her hands. Okay, he said, wiping his eyes. So, just to be clear, the insult is the love language. In our case, yes, Annie said, a small smile playing on her lips. So, Edwin lowered his voice, leaning in close. He switched to Vulpine. So, when you scold me, are you confessing your love? Annie looked at him. Her amber eyes softened, glowing with the reflected light of the nebula. No, she said in English, her voice crisp. I am telling you to stay alive. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his again. The gesture was no longer desperate. It was peaceful. But, she whispered, her voice dropping to that soft, rhythmic hum that made the crystal flowers bloom. As for confessing love, that is the part where I am truly stupid. And for you, Edwin Hart, I choose to be stupid. Every single day. Edwin smiled. Good, he whispered back, because my accent is never going to get any better. I know, Annie sighed, closing her eyes. It is tragic. But I suppose I will learn to live with the noise. She kissed him. It was a quiet kiss, not a grand gesture. But around them on the balcony, the sensitive crystal ferns unfurled their leaves. They didn't turn red. They didn't shatter. They bloomed a soft, steady gold. The color of home. The Vox Accord was signed. The galaxy was safe. And Edwin Hart finally knew exactly what his wife was saying. And she was never going to let him forget it.